It's time again for the Insiders with Chuck Chvala and Scott Jensen, sponsored by the Wisconsin Counties Association and the Tommy G. Thompson Center on Public Leadership.
Hi, I'm Chuck Chvala, former Senate Majority Leader.
And I'm Scott Jensen, former Assembly Speaker.
Well, Scott, redistricting is happening all across the country. It's the new thing, mid-decade redistricting. Who would have thought? But Wisconsin could possibly play a role here in the dynamics of whether we're going to have more Republicans or more Democrats. Is that going to happen? And what's your take?
Well, as you know, earlier, I think back in May, the Wisconsin Supreme Court decided not to open this can of worms, not to do any mid-decade redistricting in the state of Wisconsin, but national forces are clearly at play all over the country as people are trying to determine which party is going to be controlling the House next year. National Democrats were very involved in creating the Democrat majority on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. That was tens of millions of dollars from around the country. They're obviously trying to put pressure on the Wisconsin Supreme Court in order to revisit that decision that they just made, that we're not going to open this can of worms and start redistricting in the state. They're asking them to create a 3-judge panel and to draw new maps. I think it's pretty hard for the Wisconsin Supreme Court to say, well, we looked at this 3 months ago. We said, no, we're not going to do this. There's no reason to do this. And now to say, yes, there is a reason to do this just because things are happening in other states around the country. I think that would only confirm how political this majority is on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, how beholden they might be to national money. And I don't think that's a good look for them going into the next Supreme Court election, which is coming up here in the spring of 26. So my guess is that they're not going to open this back up, and we won't have redistricting at the congressional level here in Wisconsin.
Well, I have a little different take on this, and here's my thought. I remember it was the progressive court that currently has that 4-3 majority that rejected redistricting just this past spring. I was a little surprised, but when I looked at it, I realized from a legal standpoint, the court did probably what they needed to do, which is that it wasn't framed appropriately. The new framing is different. A Supreme Court is really not a court that takes on factual issues. So what's happened now is that the new attempt is to set a 3-judge panel, which will be the fact-finding entity, and then there will be a decision by the Wisconsin Supreme Court. I think there's a good chance they may take this up. And if they do, the point that Scott didn't get to is that the outrageousness in Wisconsin is that a 50-50 state, and by the way, I would argue a slightly more than 50-50 state for Democrats, has a 6-2 majority for Republicans. And there's only one of those seats that could even possibly be a seat where Democrats would have a chance. That's outrageous. This state ought to have 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans in Congress, or maybe a 5-3 if you make a competitive seat. So in terms of what should be out there, in fairness to the country and for reflecting what happens in Wisconsin, definitely should be 4-4, and we ought to have redistricting. Now, the court's not going to look at that, just as they didn't in the spring. But I think the people who brought the lawsuit in the spring did not do it quite correctly and did not give the Supreme Court the opportunity to have that fact-finding 3-judge panel. This is just the lawyer in me, but I think that this court could reverse itself, not because they're reversing themselves, but because the structure through which the first applicants came in did not meet the standards that the Supreme Court really needs in order to decide this case. And what is that? They need a factual basis to make the decision. And generally, they don't have these 3-judge panels. But in this rare instance, it would be appropriate to do so. So if I had to give it marks, I'd say slightly more than 50-50, that this court will take this up, use this new and better and more legally appropriate vehicle, and bring us back to what should be in Wisconsin, a 50-50 split in our congressional delegation.
My goodness, Chuck. Now, so the court is on break at the moment. They come back here in the fall. They start hearing cases again. You think they appoint a 3-judge panel? The panel goes off, does its fact-finding mission, comes back, I mean, what's the timeline for drawing new maps in the state of Wisconsin? If the court does this in late 25, early 26, I mean,
You know, what's wild, I mean, Scott raises frankly, a legitimate legal point, and that is, okay, how do you get all this done? Because courts move extraordinarily slowly. However, I think in this case, they realize that democracy actually may be at stake. It requires them to step up to the plate and do this timely.
that just
And I
sounds
think
very
that they will be
political
able to
to
do
me.
so. And by the way, the idea that, oh my goodness, we wouldn't have the congressional district set until January, or even February or March of next year. You know what? In Europe, they run elections for in their entire country, for their prime minister, for the whole thing, for the whole ball game in 6 to 8 weeks. Do you think there aren't going to be plenty of people to run for different congressional districts? There will be more than enough, I guarantee you. And I think although it is definitely a close call. If I had to guess, or if I had to make an educated guess, I would think it's a little more than 50-50 that this court will recognize that this new structure is an appropriate legal vehicle. They will do it, and they will step up to the plate and do it on a timely basis. Not easy for a court to do, but I expect they'll do it.
I can't imagine that. All right, we'll see who's right.
We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to The Insider with Chuck Chvala and Scott Jensen, sponsored by the Wisconsin Counties Association and the Tommy G. Thompson Center on Public Leadership.